If you're watching this on YouTube and aren't subscribed, make sure and click the subscribe button, like, comment, let us know what you think about the episode. If there's a particular guest or topic that you'd like to hear from, let us know. We love to be able to take your feedback and then get them onto future episodes. Today I'm going to be joined by Jake from FASS, and I saw a TikTok clip that he recently did, and he was talking about this brand new EPA case that involves importing diesel parts into the U.S. and some of the fallout from it. So we're going to chat about that, also some other industry news, and how it may affect what we see on the market. So I'm definitely looking forward to chatting with him today. Before we get to it, though, I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors that helps make the Diesel Podcast possible. If you go to kershaw.kaiusa.com, use code 40 TDP 2024. It gets you up to 40% off MSRP. So it's a great way to save some money, get some cool gear if you're in the market for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house. They've got a bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different opening mechanisms, different handle designs. So we appreciate them offering that discount code just for Diesel Podcast listeners. So if you're in the market, use code 40 TDP 2024 and get up to 40% off MSRP. All right, let's get to today's podcast with Jake from FASS and talking about this brand new EPA case. Jake, welcome back to the Diesel Podcast. I always enjoy chatting with you. I feel like I really know you because I see all your reels on like TikTok and Instagram and stuff where you're like sharing tons of news and things like that. So I probably see you 2 or 3 times a day, and I love the information in them because it's things about automotive, things about diesel, things that are kind of happening out there, and sometimes I don't see it. Sometimes I don't see it, on the news or something like that. So you keep me updated, and I thought it'd be cool to chat with you about a recent reel that you did. So welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I refer to myself jokingly as a professional attention seeker. So I'm glad you're seeing my face a lot because that's what I'm always aiming for.
Well, they help me. Like you'll do one on OBS Power Strokes or like first gen Rams, and there'll be something that I just didn't know about it or haven't thought about. And it kind of gives me ideas for what people want to hear about or questions that they ask. It'll remind me of something that somebody asked me. So I find a lot of value in them.
No, and I appreciate that. And truth be told, I joke about seeking attention, but I create those videos because I love it. I've been obsessed with this stuff since I was 3. When I was 2 years old, my mom made me a photo album of different trucks from around the neighborhood because that's all I would notice or care about, and that's kind of been my whole life. So I appreciate it.
What got me hooked as a kid was like the Hot Wheels stuff and like Bigfoot and like those. I always wanted those things as a kid, and then I'm an adult and I still kind of do that, talk about it. So it never stopped.
Yeah. I like to say I don't have any more money than I did when I was young. I just have a nicer truck.
You did a recent, I think it was on TikTok that I saw it, and it was about this kind of huge news. I think the EPA, the IRS, the FBI, there was a bunch of different agencies that had talked about this case with like importing delete parts or tuning and things into the United States. And I've read a little bit about it, but I think you know more of it, or I thought it'd be great to highlight because for years on the podcast, when we've talked about emissions and deletes, it's usually about like emissions compliance and either doing testing with SEMA Garage or CARB and that kind of stuff, but never really focused on the parts coming in. And that's a kind of a major issue with this one. So what's kind of the rundown on it?
Yeah. So for anyone that's not familiar, probably any diesel fan has heard of dpfdeleteshop.com. And the simplified version of it, there's a lot more that goes into the story, but the simplified version is the IRS in conjunction with the DOJ and the EPA. It's a lot of acronyms. Department of Justice, EPA, and then the IRS tag teamed this one. This was not your typical emissions case where someone sold a straight pipe and they got fined for it by the EPA. They slap on the wrist, no big deal. In the case of dpfdeleteshop.com, what had been happening was they had the owners, which were based in the U.S. Their facility, their business was based in the U.S., which is automatically not a good sign, especially if you're trying to stay under the radar. Had partnered with a company in Canada and had conspired, if you want to use the government word, to import tens of thousands of emissions defeat devices across the border. They did so for about 7 years. It went on for the better part of a decade. That website's been around forever and ever. We were just talking off air how we've both seen ads for it at one point or the other. So according to the understanding of the case that I have is that where the IRS came in, where this became not your typical emissions defeat, slap on the wrist, was that this company had been taking the funds from their customers, so these people in the United States buying emissions defeat devices, taking that money and transferring it to a bank account in the Cayman Islands, and then washing the money, laundering the money back into the States, paying their bills, paying their employees. Well, they did $73 or $74 million of revenue during their operation. DPFDeleteShop.com did. And we all know the government likes to get their money. So they came after them and successfully arrested the 2 US-based owners, as well as the 2 partners from Canada, for both the conspiracy to defraud the Clean Air Act, which just means selling emissions defeat devices. They got them on money laundering charges. So this is probably, in terms of an individual small business, not counting the fine that the EPA or that Cummins paid, their $2 billion fine. This is probably one of the biggest cases in Clean Air Act history. And the reason being is that it's much more complicated than simply selling emissions defeat devices.
Yeah. That was in some of the reading that I did. I got confused with it as far as trying to follow the story that I was reading. But typically, you're right. We hear about either with Cummins or some of the shop owners we've had on the podcast that have talked about it, or diesel companies, where it's been for a certain number of products that were sold during some year range, and that didn't that violated the Clean Air Act and some of the penalties. But this one was totally different, and it kind of jumped out at me because I had seen ads on social media for it. I don't remember it ever coming up in conversations, but I would just see it, on apps and stuff. And so I think it's kind of a big wake up call about how much this is on the radar. Like, to me, it's been on the radar because for years, a shop owner or a diesel company or somebody impacted by it would reach out and say, "Hey, can I come onto your podcast? I want to talk about this, bring attention to it." This was just totally different.
Yeah. And again, going back to earlier this year, for the big hardcore diesel fans, you might remember that emissions defeat devices, which for the last 6 years were what's called an NECI, or National Enforcement Compliance Initiative for the EPA, which literally just means we're putting a lot of time and money towards this. There's a handful of NECIs every year, and you've discussed it with the lawyer several times. Earlier this year, the EPA pulled emissions defeat devices off their list of NECIs. They said we are no longer prioritizing this, but I think this case, along with several others, makes it clear that no, they're still paying attention. It's just not a headline item for them. Yeah,
that was one of the really interesting points of the episode I did with the lawyer, because the first kind of reaction that people can have is, oh, it's not on the radar anymore. So are there going to be newer parts on the market? And the feedback I got from him was, yeah, the money's not being dedicated towards it, but they're just going straight to felony charges now. They're not messing around with civil penalties and that kind of thing. So it's just more serious now. So it's constantly evolving and changing. And I think, like, when I got into trucks, I never thought that I would ever be really focusing or talking with people about the Clean Air Act or emissions law or Chevron deference or any of the things that pertain to it. It always like turbos and transmissions and going fast. Right. But it's changed so much over, probably the last 10 years or so.
Yeah. It's a very nuanced, complicated conversation, as highlighted by the attorney you've had on several times. He's brilliant, but every time something happens related to emissions, good or bad, everyone in the industry, myself included, is trying to figure out what it means. Like, okay, well, it's, emissions defeat devices aren't an initiative anymore. Does that mean it's legal? Or, Trump appointed a new head of the EPA. Does that mean they're legal? We're always kind of looking for the good news. And it's realistically, legally, I don't think there is any good news as of late.
I think the tough part, just from what I gathered, I'm not a lawyer, don't pretend to be one, but from conversations with people who are, is it's so tough because it's written into the Clean Air Act that the EPA can enforce different aspects of it. So Congress has given them the authority to do it. And this stuff happened in the 60s, 70s, probably has been updated throughout the decades. And so it's really tough. And I think that's what we both try to do is highlight it, get the information, talk to people who are involved in the legal side of it to be able to say, what does this actually mean? What does it impact? Like the Chevron deference one was huge, and that has a lot of implications for sure across a bunch of different topics. I'm not sure that the EPA or defeat devices is the big one. There's probably other ones that it impacts potentially more, but it's always so tough to navigate it.
Yeah, yeah, and really, I'll say this: it would seem like we don't really know what's going to happen until it goes to court, and whether that's the Chevron deference or this or that or any change, anything that happens related to emissions, we don't really know what's going to happen until there's a ruling on it, and I think even after the Chevron deference, that really didn't change, and I thought it would. To be clear, like I was under the impression when the Chevron deference was nullified, that things were going to be a lot different than they are. But if like the attorney pointed out, if you examine Clean Air Act cases or convictions, they really didn't use the Chevron deference because they didn't have to. Because like you said, the ability to enforce the Clean Air Act is very clearly spelled out. There's no interpretation needed. It is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one's going to be big, but it's still so new. I think it happened over the summer and it's still waiting to kind of play out with maybe some other agencies or some other cases where Chevron deference was used a lot. Sure. But I'm not sure that the diesel emissions side of it was a big one. And I think that kind of, it leads to something else. It was another reel that you did. And it was talking about the recent election. And I think it was people who were thinking or had stated something like, well, Trump won. Are deletes cool now? Is it kind of you can do whatever you want? And I think that's another kind of reaction that people can have. And we don't necessarily just have to talk about just the emission side, but I think the whole industry at large is really excited. I think companies are seeing it. People are seeing it. They're a bit more hopeful for things in the future, maybe spending some more money on their hobbies, the things that they like to do. Yeah. So it's really going to be interesting to see over the next 4 years what it does to the industry, because it seems like automotive is heavily impacted or has been through a different kind of series of 4-year terms.
Yeah. So to your question about the new head of the EPA, it remains, like you said, it remains to be seen. Trump's appointment for the head of the EPA, his name is escaping me right now, but I believe he was a former congressman in New York. He's widely known for being very pro-American business, very anti-government overreach. So, again, we're not really going to know what happens until he takes power and his plan for the EPA starts to be rolled out. My hope, exactly what you said, is it's going to relieve pressure on the racing side of things. For years and decades, diesel drag racing, sled pulling, these were kind of known exceptions. And even when EPA enforcement really kicked off almost a decade now, towards defeat devices, for years and years, even when they were actively enforcing, fines and prison time and, arresting people for selling defeat devices, the racing community, the drag racing, the sled pulling community of, section of diesel, it seemed was fairly safe, and there wasn't really anything in writing that would make it so, but it just didn't seem like the government was super interested in going after, a guy who took a 4th gen Cummins and put a cage in it and backhalved it and whatever else and, made it a drag truck. And in the past couple of years, as a lot of your viewers will know, there has been a vested interest in that, both in the gas and diesel side of things. The EPA has pursued dedicated race shops that are building tube chassis, never again streetcars and trucks. And so my hope is, personally speaking personally here, that the new head of the EPA will prioritize things that are more worthy of the federal government's time, in my opinion. I'm not going to sit here and say that I have an ounce of hope that defeat devices will ever be federally legal. I think anybody who's waiting for that day is going to grow quite old waiting for it. But hopefully he can redirect that effort, redirect that attention away from, the race parts and make it so that the EPA is, being effective for what their mission is without wasting time in our industry.
Yeah. The real tough part, especially with diesel, is I always come back to what I've heard so many people say, not even that are in the industry or are racers or anything like that, just average guys who have one for a specific reason. They usually bought it because they needed the torque, they needed the towing capacity, and they didn't necessarily want to buy a new truck or trade in a truck every 3 to 5 years. They wanted something they could have for 10, 15, 20 plus years. And those older trucks fit that. And we see it all the time with the popularity of OBS, Ford OBS trucks, first gen, second gens, 5.9 third gens, the LB7, up to LBZ. We see that, and I think that that's been the main driving force of that whole market of defeat devices. As I'm not convinced that people wanted to go make race trucks with it. I'm convinced that they wanted to have reliability, and they wanted to have a 500, 700,000 mile truck if they chose to keep it. And the way it all rolled out in 2007, 2008, and for a while there, it was like you'd get one of these trucks and you just waited for when my O2 sensor is going to trip a code, when my DPF is going to get full, what are the EGR codes going to be? And they've gotten better over the years, but I almost feel like the standards were pushed way before the technology could meet it, and people looked for alternative methods to be able to have a reliable vehicle.
Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. I think, the stuff that you see online, the stuff you see on social media, the big high horsepower trucks, the reason you're seeing them is because they're cool. But 98.5% of diesel trucks out there that are modified in any way, shape, or form are for towing, working, hauling, getting to and from your place of work. They're not. Most people are not making 500 or 600, 700 horsepower. That's just not the case. I agree 110%. Most of these modifications that the government has been so focused on were done with truthfully good intentions. Usually it's going to be, so a typical case is going to be your dad. He tows with the truck. Maybe he takes it to work and back, and he doesn't have $11,000 out of pocket to fix, a massive emissions failure. So he takes the other route. That is what we personally see, most of the time. And, it's a known thing. Corey has spoken on it. I believe Ryan Milliken has spoken on it. These newer trucks, the newest version of these emission systems, are fair. And I know I'm going to get my head chopped off for saying this. Pretty decent, especially compared to what they were back in 07. And we see all the time, especially with, I won't plug too much of our product, but, we do have a product line related to emission systems, and it's growing rapidly because, especially with the laws that are in place and all the enforcement action that's being taken, even down to the state level, more and more owners, I should say, guys and girls, are realizing that deleting is a hassle and it's illegal. And even if you can do it, it's hard to do it reliably. And you can really gamble with an $80,000, $90,000 truck, if you get your parts from the wrong place or your tune file's messed up. And we see it all the time.
Yeah, that's a major challenge, which some of the tuners have mentioned in conversations I've had with them, is some of what they see or hear about, it comes from outside the U.S. You don't know who the tuner is. You don't know their expertise with it. And the ones that are here in the U.S., they've been enforced on so heavily that they don't touch it anymore. And they've been focused for years now on how do I do this with emissions on? How do I show that it doesn't raise emissions levels? How do I have SEMA Garage test it or CARB test it? And they're not even playing in that game anymore. So that's something that jumps out to me, as a risk, as well as, like whose tunes are they? And, I just have this huge loan, or I just threw down a ton of cash on this truck. Who's tuning the most expensive part of it, which is going to be the engine if you have to replace it?
Yeah. A quick story. I had a good friend of mine who made some modifications to a 2022 Ram, and I had nothing to do with it. Obviously we steer completely clear of all that stuff. And he called me afterwards and said, my trans is shifting funny. What's going on? I said, well, who wrote your tuning? Who wrote your trans tuning? Well, I bought it from such and such website, and it was one of these, kind of fly by night, parts websites. And I said, no, that's who you bought your tune from, who wrote the tune, who actually, created the file. And he's like, oh, I have no idea. And they won't tell me. I'm like, there's nothing you can do.
Gets expensive.
It does. Yeah. Especially with a Dodge Trans, it gets real expensive.
Yeah, I thought of something, not to change gears entirely, but I had somebody reach out to me recently, and I think you'd be perfect to ask some of these questions too. Is they're starting a diesel shop, and I don't know. I think it's gonna partly deal with trucks, but it's also gonna involve, I think, some equipment and agriculture, other things like that. And they said, "Hey, do you have any episodes talking with people about like how to market my business? Like I'm set up with the space, I'm set up. I know, I've got my team of people. I'm educating myself. I'm learning what I need to do for all these other parts of business. But what are some good ways to do that?" And I thought it'd be great to ask you because what you do and you've been doing for a long time, I'm sure you talk with a lot of shop owners. They, call you up and say, "Hey, I want to sell your product line," or "I want to be able to offer this." What are some things you would tell somebody who's relatively new that they can do to help themselves either reach kind of more people locally, or maybe it's in a state, but they're looking for cost effective ways to be able to reach the right kind of customer, the right person who needs their services?
Yeah, that's a great question. You might have to cut me off if I ramble for too long. Um, so with marketing these days, I'll give you the simplified version. So I have this conversation a lot with big brands, small shops, everyone in between. For one, attention is free to a point. So by that I mean you've got all these platforms. You've got Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, all of them, and they're free to be on. They're free to post to. Obviously, they're not free to advertise on, but take advantage of what's free. Take advantage of where the attention is. If you look at all those apps, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, they're all essentially becoming the same app. TikTok really broke the mold when they came out because it was short form video, vertical, so up, phone straight up and down, short form vertical video that was interest based. And where that really deviated TikTok away from the other apps was all the other apps were based on who you follow. They were based on, I follow this page, so I see their posts. Well, TikTok broke that mold. They said, we don't care who you follow. We show you what you're interested in. What's going to keep you in the app the longest, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. So my point is, number one, be everywhere that you can be. Be on every platform. You can make one video and post it to 5 or 6 platforms. And remember that these platforms are prioritizing interests. So if you're going to make a video, try to aim towards something that people might want to see. People might be interested in. It might be, the more specific, the better. If you can make a video about, the lowest mile 2007 Ram you've ever seen, there's a video. Make a video about how to do this or how to do that. Really prioritizing things that people would want to watch over what you want to say. That's a big mistake a lot of shops and brands make is, and don't get me wrong, advertising needs to happen. You need to speak about your services and products, but for the most part, a lot of shops and brands focus on what they want to say, what I have to say, what I want you to hear versus what what this audience might find interesting. So that'd be number one. Number two, and then I'll wrap up my speech here. Don't sweat the technical stuff. Some of the most popular videos in the world were created on an iPhone with no mic, no gimbal, no anything fancy. And the reason it was successful is because people found it interesting. They found it entertaining, informative, engaging. And so I get a lot of flack for this. I like to say, there's no bonus points for using a $10,000 camera. Like if your video is not worth watching on an iPhone, it's not worth watching with the perfect edit, the perfect sound, the perfect color. Quality helps if the subject matter is already interesting, but if the video concept is not interesting, you can spend $100,000 making it and no one will care.
Common question we get from you guys a lot is, "Hey, I need a diesel engine. I either, I can't wait this long to get one, or normal place I get stuff from it just takes too long, or they don't have the parts in it that I need. Maybe my truck's not stock or I tow heavy with it. I don't want to go back with just a stock engine." DFC Diesel is a sponsor of the podcast. We worked with them, hand in hand on doing episodes, answering technical questions. They have a complete lineup of Cummins, Duramax, and Power Stroke. remanufactured engines that are set to a standard of ISO 9001 2015 standards, which is a huge deal in the aftermarket. And there's certain levels of quality testing, validation that are required for that. So when you get one of those engines, the type of quality that's built behind it with an industry-leading warranty that's really comprehensive. And the other thing with that is, sometimes the options that are out there, it's a basic OEM engine. You want a little bit more. You don't want to have the same failure again. So there's a bunch of different series of engines that they have, from core, street, tow haul, and also the Speed of Air series, which we've covered on the podcast before. There's a lot of really cool benefits to it. And if you have questions about that, reach out to them. If you don't know the type of engine that you're looking for, if you go to dfcdiesel.com, there's a ton of info there. You can send an email or you can reach out to them. Also, they're working with Speed of Air pistons, which it's the only piston that pays for itself. And there's a lot of really cool technology behind it. So you can add that into your build and be able to get better fuel economy, increased power, increased torque, and better engine life out of it. Some of the most common engine applications or series of engines that they have with that lead time, a lot of them are in stock or they have really short lead times. So you can check your favorite retailer or go to dfcdiesel.com, check them out, see what's in stock, see what you can get. If you have questions, maybe you want to do something that's outside of the normal series of engines, they have tons of choices for rods, cranks, pistons, valve train upgrades, tons of different things. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure and head on over and check them out. That's a really good insight. I think that can be one of the challenging things too. If I think of, a newer shop owner and they have, their time's limited too, like with managing the business, getting trucks in and out of the shop and those kind of things, is being able to connect with the audience. And I think they do know their audience, their potential customer better than anyone, but, really making it relevant and interesting can be kind of tough, because like, if I go on TikTok and I just like search something diesel, I'm going to find so much stuff where I might not be interested in a passenger car or a piece of equipment or a big semi. I might be looking for something really specific, like an 01 to 04 LB7, and I want to just, learn about those. So I think being able to know people and know trends and know, I'm not even sure if it. I guess it's kind of trial and error, right? Like you got to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. And I'm super flattered, that people ask me about making content. I'm certainly not the biggest content creator out there, but for every one video that you see or anybody else sees, there's probably 5 or 10 pieces of content that didn't do well. So to a point, it's a game of attrition. We make so much, I make so much content that just on the law of averages, some of it does well and people enjoy it and learn from it and find it engaging. And so it's definitely don't get discouraged if you make your first 10 TikToks and nobody watches it, because it could be the 11th one that takes off and lands you 6 jobs that you didn't have before.
Do you get excited when if you kind of look back to say 10 years ago and think of ways that brands in diesel or automotive reached people versus what they do in 2024 and are going to do in 2025? Is it vastly more exciting now the way that they do it or can do it versus the way it used to be done?
Yeah. That's a great question, man. You're bringing the heat today. You got some questions. So I'll answer the question in a roundabout way for anybody that's wanting, whether you're a truck owner, a shop owner, brand owner. What I was very fortunate to learn about a decade ago was that social media, of all things, and this catches some people off guard, social media has brought back the small town environment. And what I mean by that is, throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, we saw advertising explode. We saw billboards and magazines and radio and then TV and so on. And, our barrier as a consumer, our barrier to advertising was super low, right? Because we weren't being bombarded all day, every day. So we were fairly receptive to advertising. And, in the 90s, people were, if I sent out an email as a brand, I had 95 or 98% of the people that I sent it to reading it, which is insane. I mean, marketers would kill for that now. Now, you're lucky to get 10% of people to open an advertising email. So point being, social media, because it's interest based and you can be yourself, and even if you own a shop, you speak honestly and openly with your target customer. We're kind of coming back to this thing where people are making buying decisions based on how connected they feel. So if they watch your videos, they feel like they know you, they feel like they like your personality. That has a lot more influence than anything else on purchasing decisions and where we buy now, because people are so fed up, so done with the billboards and the constant, YouTube pre-roll ads. And we're being hit with, I think, an average of 330 ads a day individually. Like that's like the national average. So social media, while people think it's like making us all super disconnected and whatever, and there's probably some truth to that, on an advertising level for shops and brands, we're actually more connected now than ever, because you can speak directly to your customer, and that customer is going to buy based on who they feel a connection with.
When I think about that from like my perspective of being a consumer, I love the access to information. Like I wasn't making any big purchases in the 90s other than like lunch and stuff at the cafeteria. But like when I think about that, I can find so much information on a specific part, a specific install, a coating, whatever it is that I might want to find. I can take all that into account before I make the purchase. And I think you're right. I think about, do I like the brand? Do I like the person? Do I like their business persona? How connected do I feel or don't I feel to it? That drives me to buy a lot of different things. Versus, I don't know, in the past, it was kind of like there was like a gateway to information. You either had to go, buy a magazine, or you had to watch a certain TV show, or you had to go somewhere to be able to learn about something, where now we all have smartphones. You just open it up, go right there, and you can learn everything you want to learn about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell, I use the example all the time, when it comes to advertising. I asked the question, how much influence does a billboard for new toothpaste have? Let's say you could drive by that billboard 100 times a day and it wouldn't motivate you at all, for most of us, to buy that toothpaste. No one cares. We see billboards all the time. But if your spouse came to you and said, oh my gosh, I just bought this toothpaste, it is the greatest thing I've ever tried, you have to try it. For most of us, assuming we like our spouse, that's gonna get you that. Okay, that is a powerful recommendation. That I trust that. And so the goal of brands and shops now, and it's for a bunch of different reasons. One, to provide better service and so on. But the goal of a brand, at least partially, should be to get as close to that spouse recommendation as you can get. Be as personal, be as helpful, be as informative, provide people with enough value so that when you make a recommendation, hey, I've got this new widget for you, I made it for you, here's the problems that it solves, that customer, you're way more effective than a billboard. You're never going to be as effective as a personal recommendation from their spouse, but you're trying to work your way towards that level of connection, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you think that being real and authentic is playing a major role, going back to the content or videos or shorts, or how a truck owner connects with a brand, or a brand wants to connect with a truck owner, how real it is? Like, for an example, when I had chatted with you guys about the issue with that F450, and I talked with you about it and Brad about it, I could sense the emotion behind it, everything that went into it on a personal level. It made it more powerful to me than if I just saw a headline or I just caught maybe a sentence or something about it. So do you think being real and authentic is maybe even the most important part of all this?
That's another great question. Yeah, absolutely it is. And I think, there's a lot of brands and shops out there that are trying to create content. They're trying to be entertaining. They're trying to be informative, but it's with an agenda. It's, we're going to pretend this is a fun video. We're going to pretend this is an informational video, but really it's trying to sell you something. And I think we've all had that experience where that guy you went to high school with became a financial advisor or started selling some brand of supplements, and you haven't heard from him in 15 years, and he DMs you and he's like, hey, just wanted to see how you were doing. And you had that radar
Yeah.
instantly, I know you're not. That's not why you're hitting me up. And I think to your point about being authentic, is you really have to respect the fact that, especially these days, consumers have amazing BS detectors. And if you're not coming correct, if you're not coming to them genuinely trying to entertain them or provide information or give them something, if you're secretly trying to, get money out of their pocket, they know it. They all know it.
I thought of another question for you. So when it comes to age brackets, do you find that, say, like your generation or younger have that higher BS detector and want more authenticity than different ones? And I'll just give it like a brief example. It's like when I think of my parents and what they will see, or they'll say, "Oh, check this out. It's really cool." And I look at whatever it is they send me. It's not, it doesn't have that real authentic feel. It's more about like something new, or the price is right, or something like that, but they're focused in on it, versus people who are younger, which are the future of diesel and future of automotive and future of everything. I find that they're very astute. They're very dialed in. Like they can detect if it's fake, if it's, BS, if what the angle is, and then they immediately tune it out because they're bombarded by it like the whole time. So if you can reach them and you can get a positive response from them, I think you're doing well. But do you see that as well when it comes to different age brackets or different kind of life experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely say, the younger demos, as you said, they tend to skew a little more pessimistic or suspicious, because a lot of the brands that are targeting them they're trying to be on the cutting edge of marketing. They're trying to, build as many relationships as they can, which is a great thing. But also specifically within diesel, I've noticed this, that different sub demographics, for example, like the owner operators, they often, not all the time, often care a whole lot less about being entertained than they do what's the data. I make my living with this truck. Show me on paper, which we have data, we have data to back up all of our products, which makes it an easier conversation. But, when you start talking to owner operators or hot shotters or whatever, they need to know the hard numbers. Why am I making this investment? What is the purpose? What is the ROI? Explain it to me on a spreadsheet, and then we'll talk. And so, that's why we do try to, we do try to mix, the entertainment with the information, because we know some people, they prefer to, have a more entertainment-based relationship. They prefer to, laugh and see cool stuff, and they tend to gravitate towards brands that do that successfully. And then there's a whole nother crowd that they don't really care if you make them laugh or not. They want to know hard numbers. Why am I buying this?
Yeah, I kind of fall in between, I think. Sometimes I just like to be entertained. And there's some really like awesome channels or pages out there that are just like, they're funny and I just laugh about it. But then I kind of geek out on the details, the nerds, the like the data. Like my friends call me a diesel nerd, because I'm always wanting to know about just really specific things, just because I like to know it and I'm just curious and want to learn as much as I can. And I think that can be tough too, to be able to either find or relate to. And I think it kind of goes back to that first question I asked you that someone had messaged in about, is how do I do it? So you have to take all this into account. Like, what age group are you reaching? How do you want to reach them? What are you comfortable doing? What is going to be interesting? And so there is really no like definitive answer. And it's kind of unfortunate, because I wish I could just point them to one thing and say, this will tell you everything you need to know. But the diesel industry is so diverse, and there's so many groups and interests and life experiences. That's what I love about it. To me, it doesn't feel stagnant. It's always evolving and changing. And what I thought was cool 10 or 15 years ago, I look back and I'm like, why did I think that was cool? Or did I ever think we would have, a truck with 500 horsepower, 1,200 foot-pounds of torque? Like, people used to spend 10 to 15 grand to make their second gen, be able to do that or hold that kind of power. And we're there. And so it's a really exciting industry can be tough to stay on top of. But I think the information that you gave is going to definitely help that person, other people, that are curious about it. And then I just love just kind of being a nerd and asking you questions about this stuff, because I find it fascinating. It's been one of the toughest things that I've found, is like when we first started the podcast, like podcasts had been around, but there weren't a whole lot of them in diesel. And a lot of times I'd like reach out to a company and I'd be like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? We talk about trucks. And they're like, what's a podcast? Is it like a YouTube video? I'm like, not really, but kind of. It can be. Versus now, people are familiar about it, or they will say, I want to hear an hour-long conversation and just talk about this one aspect of the turbine wheel on a turbo for this year truck because I can't find this information. So it's constantly challenging and fun to try to stay on top of that.
Yeah, it's amazing how much things have changed in the last 5 to 10 years, and not just being nice because you're having me on your show, but you've really been the front runner for dispelling long form information. I think the general population has Joe Rogan, and then our diesel world has the Diesel podcast. It's been really cool because as information gets more and more bite sized, on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts, it's really nice to have this growing bank of long form content where we could sit down at any time and listen to dozens of high level industry experts. So it's been really cool to see.
That's tough. Like I struggle with short stuff, like how to pack a bunch of information into something short, because I find for me, I like longer content. I like full complete answers. I like going into the details, but I understand, like I love Joe Rogan, but I don't have 3.5 hours to just listen solid to it. So I have to break it up and then I forget about it. And then 6 months later, it like shows up on some suggested, YouTube video. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to watch that. So it can be really tough to kind of find that balance. But I think there's ways to reach, kind of both groups of people. And I think that was what really jumped out to me, like going back to the beginning of our conversation with that case that arose, is I didn't really see anybody talking about it, and it was so huge. And I saw your video, and then I saw the other one, with the election, and I'm like, this is great information because it's educating me. It's popping up on my radar. I know, people are messaging or asking about it or saying, hey, you have somebody on to talk about this or that or whatever it might be. So you did that in like a minute, and I commend you for it because like I can't do that. I don't know if I talk too slow or it's too hard. Like I just stretch it out for 45 minutes or 60 minutes. And I think, for that shop owner, that message, you got to think about that too, is how do you want to reach people? 1 minute or 60 minutes? And they both have challenges. They both have benefits, and you have to account for all this and still run your business and still make a profit and still manage your employees and still get customer trucks in and out. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And it's, there's always, I believe there's always going to be a strong desire for long form content. Cause like the information that comes through your podcast, as you said, you can give bite-sized pieces, but you can't ever paint the full story in 90 seconds. It's never going to happen. So I think for shop owners, especially in brands, a good way to think about that short form content, which I would consider anything under 90 seconds, think of that as your opener. That could be your opening line to start a much longer conversation. And the nice part about it is, you can make a bunch of it with relatively little time investment. I've personally seen some very large brands in the diesel industry that you would think had a marketing team of 20 people, and it's just 3 people that make a lot of short content. And it's incredible what you can achieve if you're able to just kind of schedule your content, make it consistently. Most of it's not going to work. Most people are not going to see it, but if you do it consistently, you will grow, you will generate business, it will work. It just takes time.
Last question I got for you is, there's certain, I won't name them, but there's like certain brands out there that I'm a big fan of. I don't work with them. They've never been on the podcast or anything like that. But they're brands that I know make a really cool product. They do something really innovative, but they don't want to do this. They don't want to either sit down and talk, or they don't want to make the content, or they don't want to do some of the things. I'm like, the whole industry is missing out because you guys have a really cool product. What would you say to one of those? You probably can think of some off the top of your head that you wish they were out there more because they do something really cool. And for whatever reason they don't. Is the industry going to pass them by? Are they putting themselves 5 to 10 years behind the curve? Is it going to be a major issue down the road? Or can they just kind of sit back and say, we made our name in 2005 to 2010. Like, we're good. Things are steady. We don't need to grow. We're fine.
Oh man. you're loading the questions up today. So so I'll try to cut through my long-winded speech on this. For any industry, but specifically diesel, specifically automotive, the job of the people in charge of marketing or in charge of creating content is to only stay loyal to your customers. That's it. And what I mean by that is go where your customers are, stay loyal to them, to where the type of content they want to consume, the platforms they want to be on. The biggest mistake, or one of the biggest mistakes I see brands and companies making, exactly what you just said, is, well, they might have a new product, but they don't really like TikTok, or they don't want to use Instagram Reels, or they don't want to make a YouTube short because they have this loyalty or this level of comfort with the way that they currently advertise, whether that's, TV ads or long form YouTube, or, magazine ads or radio ads. And I'm not saying that stuff isn't worth an investment, but as a percentage, that's not where your customers are. So in my opinion, the role of marketing and sales staff and content creators in the industry, be completely agnostic to the platform. It doesn't matter what you like. You go where your consumer is. And if you refuse to do that, that's fine. You'll probably still sell some stuff, but somebody else, probably your competitor, is taking that attention away from you now because they're going to go where the attention is. And I remember years back, I had a friend who worked in the wheel industry. I won't name names, but it was a fairly large wheel company, very successful. And this was right as TikTok was emerging, and organic reach was just obscene. I mean, you could really reach a lot of customers with TikTok fairly quickly. And I was asking him, I'm like, why, wheels are great. They're visual. They're cool to look at. You can make cool videos. You can talk about them. And he said, well, I don't really like TikTok. And I wanted to just shake him and go, I don't care if you like it. It doesn't matter what you like. It matters what your customer likes. And I think if more people were agnostic to the platform, they didn't get romantic about specific forms of advertising, and they just tried to meet their customers where they go, they'd be a lot more successful.
That's really good advice. I think that'll definitely, or hopefully will help, people who hear this that are looking to do that. Because I think as diesel has grown with like technology and the parts and some of the things you've talked with me on the podcast before, but then how we reach the people that are out there and stay in tune with them, it ultimately pulls more people in. Because once you buy that first tuner or that first turbo or that first performance part or whatever it might be, you do get hooked on it. And then once you get hooked, you start to learn more, you get invested in it, it becomes a hobby. For some people, it becomes a career. And so the more of that I see in whatever platform it is or whatever it is somebody does to reach people, I get excited about it, because ultimately I want to see more people in diesel vehicles, preferably diesel trucks. But I mean, as long as it's diesel, great. And there's more content for it. So I appreciate you taking time with me today, doing those two shorts. I know you do tons of them, but those were two I saw last week that I'm like, I got to get Jake on the podcast to talk about this, because people want to hear about it and they just want opinions. They want to know a little bit about it. They want to know what people think. And I appreciate you being open with it, because sometimes it can be tough to touch this subject or just share an opinion on it. And it's what people want to hear. They just want to know what's going on. So I appreciate you chatting with me today. And then that marketing advice that you gave, that's tons of years of experience and trial and error. And so anyone who's in that position that has those questions, they just kind of got a dissertation on some things to do to be able to be more successful and maybe not have to have the trial and error so much.
Yeah, no, as always, man, it's an honor to be on the show. I really appreciate what you do. I wish I could be, with regard to all the legal stuff, the status of certain parts, I wish I could be the angel of good news, but I'm not. I don't see that happening. So onward and upward, and it's always fun to be on.
Don't forget, diesel fans, make sure and head on over to kershaw.kaiusa.com. Use code 40 TDP 2024. Get you up to 40% off MSRP. It's a great way to save some money, get some cool gear for a new EDC knife, one for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house. They've got you covered with a bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different opening mechanisms, different handle designs, and we appreciate them offering that discount code just for Diesel Podcast listeners. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters, Tyler Loewen and 23 Diesel, J Cole, Robert, CUTTERUP Rob. We appreciate all of their support, all of our other Patreons, all of you who subscribe on YouTube and podcast apps, follow us on social media. We look forward to bringing you more of the content that you guys want to hear in 2024. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.